Chicago, a city of bright lights and broad shoulders, founded in 1837 and is home to Michael Jordan's Chicago Bulls, deep dish pizza, mesmerizing architecture, and the most historic improv school in the world.
My daughter once asked me, what's the most fun you've had in show business? And I said, without a doubt, it was Second City Theater main stage doing that sketch 7 times a week with Chris right in your face.
I was an improviser at Second City and at a place called the Improv Olympic in Chicago, and I talk in the book about improv having really kind of changed my professional life and even sort of my worldview a little bit.
Then I got to Chicago.
Yeah. You have said if there were no Second City, there'd be no Joan Rivers.
The experience was the best in my life. I learned to improvise. I learned what I think I should say because it's going to be funny, and that's who I am. So all that was, God loves Second City. God bless Second City for that.
The primary Second City credo is to reflect life, that art should reflect life, and that it is our job to lampoon, poke fun at, socially and politically and emotionally and anthropologically comment on the way the world works.
I was a co-producer at Saturday Night Live after a few years there, and every summer we would go with Lauren to scout Chicago talent. And one year we were there at Second City, and the guy we kept hearing about was this guy, Steve Carell.
You started in Second City, yeah, doing sketch comedies. Any characters you remember doing over there?
There was one character I was working on, and it was a guy who, it was a poker scene, and the guy and all of his friends are talking about sex, and they're trying to regale each other with these, you know, these stories of sexual conquest, and my guy didn't have any sort of context. He, you know, no frame of reference, and obviously was trying to lie. So that became 40-Year-Old Virgin.
And I saw, all these people went to Second City. So a buddy and I went and visited a friend up in Chicago, then went to the show at Second City, and I was blown away. And then on the way down the steps, I saw they teach classes.
Mentors and teachers, I want to thank you know, people like Mick Napier, folks at Second City, IO, The Annoyance. I want to thank folks at SNL. I want to thank Lauren, who went to go take a dump now. Perfect. Ay, ay, ay.
In this documentary, we will explore where these icons got their start and learn how people like you can follow in their footsteps. Welcome to the Second City.
My name is Kelly Leonard. I am the Executive Vice President of Creative Strategy, Business Development, and Innovation at the Second City. I have the longest title at the Second City. That was always my goal. You know, when I give my talks around the country around why people should care about improvisation, I talk about improvisation as being like yoga for your social skills, that it's sort of loud, noisy group mindfulness, that it's a practice in being unpracticed. And then I say, if that surprises you, it wouldn't if you knew the origin story of the Second City. So in the 20s and 30s, at Jane Addams Hull House on the south side of Chicago, there was this woman by the name of Viola Spolin who was a social worker, and her job was to better integrate immigrant children and neighborhood children who came into her care. So the way she did that was creating all these improv games, exercises games, that the kids would play, and many of which were in gibberish or silence because the kids didn't always share the same language. But they would play these games and they would collaborate and communicate. And so it was really this sort of bridge of using art to form a civil society. And her son, Paul Sills, loved the games, and he taught them to his friends, people like Mike Nichols and Elaine May. And that group formed the first pure improvisational theater in modern America. This is in 1955, and that group was called the Compass Players. Essentially, that morphed into the Second City, which primarily used that improv to then create scripted scenes. And that opened in December 16th of 1959. So it came out of children's games, and we do teach kids today, but we also teach adults, and we teach corporate folks, and we do productions both here in Chicago and in Toronto and in Brooklyn, New York, and then we have touring productions that go all over the world. So it's really become sort of a vast exercise in improv-based comedy wherever we can find ourselves.
Could you describe your experience at Second City, and could you also walk me through the process of sketch writing to ultimately performing it on stage?
So I had a very strange experience at Second City in that I had already been hired at Saturday Night Live as a writer 3 years earlier. I had already been at SNL for 2.5 years when I got a phone call, do you want to do the main stage of Second City? I still had a good time because I love that stage. And, I loved writing for Chris Farley. I wrote the motivational speaker when I was there for Chris. I loved Jill, and I loved Dave Pasquesi. He was very angry at me for taking the job, but he's a great improviser, one of the greatest. And also a very smart person, and I like him, and I like his talent. So in the end, I think I gained respect from hopefully everybody. I only was there for 3 months. If I bumped anyone, which I did, people like Mark Beltzman and Ron West, they took that spot as soon as I left. I went back to SNL the next year, so starting in September, they all got to move up. And in fact, I took Chris Farley and Timmy Meadows with me, so I even made more room for people.
Right.
I should have been welcomed with open arms, as it turns out.
The sort of script that we had when I worked in the box office, when people would call and say, hey, is Carrot Top performing tonight at the Second City? Would be like, well, we don't do stand-up. Have you seen Saturday Night Live? Have you seen Whose Line Is It Anyway? We're kind of those two things. We utilize improvisation to create sketch comedy, and the shows, which are 2-act reviews, are often followed by a pure improv set, but the reviews themselves are sketches and scenes and songs and some improv. Sometimes it's themed, sometimes it's not. What it almost always is 6 amazing performer, writer, improvisers, and we're primarily known as the place that launches the career of so many people who end up on your television screens and on movie screens and now on your phones. So everyone from the early days like Alan Arkin, Mike Nichols, Elaine May, to people like Peter Boyle and Joan Rivers and Robert Klein and Fred Willard, to people like John Candy and Gilda Radner and John Belushi and Bill Murray, to Chris Farley and Bonnie Hunt and George Wendt, to Stephen Colbert, Steve Carell, Tina Fey, Amy Poehler. I mean, the list is sort of endless. And then today you've got Tim Robinson and Sam Richardson, and it's just 65 years. We'll turn 65 on December 16th of this year in 2024. And it's still the place where people hone their comedic voice and their skills, and then we let them go and share that with the world.
I suspect that what we're really doing is some kind of performance art here, but I sure as hell wouldn't want to say that in public. It goes over a lot better as a sport. For one thing, we're not going out and bothering the audience. We're playing the game basically for our own sake. I mean, it's so complex, and you have to pay so much attention that to start, like trying to entertain the audience with jokes at the same time is kind of like a fruitless undertaking. And what the audience laughs at, and indeed will cheer at, as you guys have seen, are these moments of discovery, moments of connection, where the art by committee, the group brain really does start functioning.
So Del Close was someone who was involved with the Second City fairly early as an actor. He was in the same cast with people like Avery Schreiber and Jack Burns and Joan Rivers. And he was a very, very gifted performer. And a real iconoclast as a human being. And after Paul Sills left Second City, who was our original director, original artistic director. Sheldon Patinkin took over, and he was directing shows. And then Del started directing at Second City, and he had this very on-again, off-again relationship because Del Close was part of so many different counterculture movements. He found himself in LA working with groups like The Committee, but he also is rumored to have helped L. Ron Hubbard form Scientology. It's always hard to know what's true and what's not with Del. He was, friends with the Beat Generation and people like Lenny Bruce. He's renowned for being the mentor teacher to people like John Belushi and Chris Farley. Those two things are definitely true. Very dark side, addicted to drugs and alcohol at different times, got clean at different times. There's stories, and I know these are true as well, where he was locked in a psych ward and the producers at Second City would go check him out so he could come direct the show at Second City and then have to take him back to the hospital afterwards. And then at a certain point, I think he just got tired of us, and maybe we got tired of him, and he ended up creating, artistically, he was the artistic half of a team with Sharna Halpern to start a thing called Improv Olympic, which then got sued by the Olympics and had to change their name to IO. But it's one of the longest running homes of improvisation in Chicago, still exists to this day. And Del believed the big schism at Second City. So Bernie Solins, one of our co-founders, really didn't think improv had much value beyond as a tool for creating sketch comedy. And Del believed it was an art form in and of itself, like fireworks. That's the kind of thing he thought it was.
I know you talk about Del in your book, but my next question is about him. And could you talk a little about Del, and what was it about your interview with him that inspired your career in showbiz?
Yeah, well, so Del was very much not the kind of person I would personally choose as a mentor or a hero. Hanging out with him for the 2 hours that I did on that fortuitous day, I loved the life of the mind that he showed me. That he had a lot of demons of his own, and he survived those. He truly did. Even though he'd been through so much and put himself through so much, he survived. And he even thrived because he loved ideas, he loved performance, he loved, as he said, trying to deduce what makes a human being tick. And that was his pursuit. And it kept him mentally alive. And I think it energized him through his whole life. So I really grooved on that. I felt it, I could see it in him, and I wanted to have some version of that as I went forward in life. Was this excitement he had still about doing what he did.
I have theories about why Chicago, for art in general. All right, here's some of my theories. One is the weather is so bad that it's impossible to be happy all the time because it's so gray and cold and terrible. Our politics are terrible. Our sports teams often suck. And to try to find some level of happiness, we have to generate it ourselves because the conditions are so terrible. And thus art happens. Art doesn't come out of comfort. Great art comes out of discomfort. And it is not comfortable living in Chicago for a lot of the time.
The audience is smart. The audience knows and likes comedy. Much of the audience is funny in their own personal lives. They kind of have a Midwestern sarcastic streak, a cut down streak that they cut things down around them. It is very hurtful to children. It can be hurtful, but it's also you got an audience that's already in their own daily lives funny people. I also think because you don't have the big business of show business right there in your face, you don't have Broadway and you don't have movies and television, you know, sort of around you. You know, you're in Chicago, there aren't networks coming to see your show, there aren't even agents really. You do your comedy and you pursue your voice for your own purposes, for your own artistic discovery. And that helps you grow. And when you're surrounded by that bigger business, and when people, even in your small theater, let's say you're in LA, you know, they get a job in a big TV show, they audition for a big TV show, you feel like you should be having that break and chasing that break. When you're Chicago, you're competing against the other people who also are starting out, who are doing cool things. And you're going, how can I do the cooler thing? How can I grow and get my voice more pure? And that's what you should be doing when you're starting out. You shouldn't be chasing the big jobs.
And so much great art that comes out of Chicago is unownable. So think about it. No one can own improvisation. No one can own the blues. No one can own house music. No one can own spoken word. These are all art forms that really developed in Chicago and sent forth to the world, but also the artistry that comes out of not attaching a dollar sign to every single thing you do, so you have time to gestate and create, and then eventually do make money. I mean, because like everyone's got to live, and everyone should live. But you know, the road to being a great artist again is not one that is comfortable with a full-time check at day one. You know, if it were comfortable with a full-time check at day one, I don't think you get the great art.
The next question is about Chris Farley. You mentioned in the past that it was due to Chris Farley's brilliance that gave you the idea to try dramatic acting. In what ways do you think your experience at Second City helped shape the way you approach these dramatic roles?
Well, this is a very clever way of posing that question that you've come up with. What happened was I was doing an improvisation with Chris and Jill Talley, and Chris was being hilarious, and I'm looking at the audience, they're right here, and they're watching Chris, and I have the thought, if I was sitting in that audience, I would be watching that guy too. I would not be watching me. And I'm not resentful at all. I'm just like, yeah, I mean, this guy's hilarious. But I also had the weird thought that came out of nowhere of, and if this was a drama, I don't know why I thought that, but if this was a drama on stage, I might be the most interesting character up here. Because when I come on stage, I bring a somewhat complex, you might say murky or diffuse aura. You know, your favorite comedy performers, Jack Black, Chris Farley, Will Ferrell, you know, you smile. You just smile when they come out. Even if they're playing bad or wrong, or you just smile. They make you happy. They bring a joy and a smile onto the stage in front of you from the second they appear. And that is good for comedy. I don't bring that. When I walk on stage or in the camera, the first thing you think is, what is going on with this guy? And that actually is good for drama. It's good for drama to have you asking the question, what are this guy's motives? He's smiling, but I'm not sure he's good. He's friendly. I can't tell. And then you discover over the course of the show or play or whatever, you know, hopefully it becomes clear. But that uncertainty is actually a great thing for drama. And it's not really a great thing for comedy.
So yeah, I'm really lucky My first cast at the Second City in 1992 included Steve Carell, Stephen Colbert, and Amy Sedaris, just to start with. I mean, the Colbert thing is different because he was my wife's roommate at Northwestern. For Colbert, again, he's a friend, wickedly smart, wickedly talented. Steve Carell, at the same time, was someone who it was much harder to pinpoint his genius because so much of what Carell is good at is a slow burn, playing without the ball, setting up others, and he's a tremendous actor. He was at Second City a long time before he moved, maybe like 8 years or so, which is unusual to be here that long. And it took him, I mean, he's so famous now and does so many different things, but it's like that took a while for everyone to figure out how great he was. Tina Fey was someone who was in maybe the very first class that we auditioned when I became producer at Second City. And it was just clear, again, like Colbert, she has such a tremendous wit and knowledge, and her ability to frame that, both as a writer and an improviser, is phenomenal. There's lots of really talented, brilliant people here, and there are some people who just are singularly unique, and I'd say Tina and Amy Poehler were two of those. Amy Poehler more obviously. I remember Amy had her bike stolen, or part of her bike. I think she was left with her bike tire when she was doing her level 5 show, her grad show in the training center, and she wrote and sang a song about it. And literally, my wife Ann, who was teaching at the time, was like, "You've got to see this," and like pulled me in just to see this number. I'm like, "This is brilliant, so obvious." Tina was not obviously a star. She, Amy, cute and blonde and bubbly and like, and Tina was a writer brain and a little, odder and all that. And, but both of them, and they were best friends, were just so clearly operating at another level. And the blessing about like hiring at Second City is that it's never one person. Like there's never one person here who hired any of these folks. It's a group of us in a room, generally agreeing, never not agreeing on a Tina Fey or a Stephen Colbert or an Amy Poehler or an Adam McKay. Never not agree. We all did. Everyone's like, obvious, good, they're in. And then we would disagree about people, and generally speaking, those people either made it or didn't, but aren't the people who everyone talks about as the superstars. The superstars are clearly superstars. We all get it. It's almost impossible not to notice this. The one funny story that Andrew Alexander, who owned Second City for many years, sold it not too long ago, tells is that he was producing SCTV and he had seen this young African-American stand-up who he really wanted to put in the cast. And this kid was ready to do it. He was only like 19 years old. And he came to Second City and did improv sets. And the cast ultimately voted not to allow Andrew to cast Eddie Murphy in the cast of SCTV. So he went to SNL.
So yeah. I'm just curious as to how do you think your experience at Second City impacted the way you approach sketch comedy during Mr. Show?
Well, Second City is a sketch stage, and it is a scripted show. It does do improvisations after the scripted show. First, you get a 2-hour scripted show, hour and a half, and then they'll improvise. So it was scripted sketch comedy, and I learned, the difference between Second City and Saturday Night Live was I didn't get a whole lot on at Saturday Night Live. My hit ratio was very, very low. At Second City, I got a lot into the show. I was a good writer in the context of Second City. I was a very good writer. And I got to have a lot of sketches in there, including the motivational speaker, which was one of the best things I've ever written. And I got to just become a better sketch writer, which helped me immensely at Mr. Show.
So Saturday Night Live, which premiered in 1975, as many people know, that first cast included a few Second City alumni, John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, and Gilda Radner. And the following year, Bill Murray joined the cast, and there were 4. There was great concern that suddenly SNL would take all of our talent all the time. and generally somewhat true. That happened. A lot of our people have gone on to Saturday Night Live. I forget it last. I mean, between writers and performers, it's well over 60, 70 individuals. But the SNL relationship, at a certain point, I remember when I first started producing here in 1992, there was a real idea of like, look, this is they help us. You know, people see, you know, Tina Fey going to SNL, and they recognize that she started at Second City, or Rachel Dratch or Amy Poehler, and they want to come here and they want to take that path. So we're on much more friendly terms, and have been for at least a few decades now, so that they come in and scout at the Chicago location pretty much every year. They probably come in a couple times, sometimes 3 times a year. When they're looking for people, they'll fly folks out to audition, and it's a really cordial, good relationship. And I think for so many of us who are, you know, aging at our jobs, and Lorne Michaels is not the young producer he was when he started that thing in 1975. There's sort of a romance to the relationship. And I remember a few years ago, I was coming up, they were in the building, and I was coming in, and Lorne was just standing outside in front of the arches and the Second City banner, and he says, "Will you take a picture of me in front of the banner?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And so he gave me his phone, and I did a little picture for him, and it was just a nice little moment, and it was something that he wanted to have, and it was great.
Second City is not an assembly line, she said. It is, yes, you can get in line. Yes, you can do the classes. Yes, you can be in the tour company. But who gets those slots in the main stage show is not something you get simply by putting in the hours. You know, putting in the hours is helpful. You'll get better. But if there's a person outside of the club, Second City, who's good and maybe can bring some spark to our show, we can hire them. They can come in. And that was true of Chris Farley as well. Chris Farley did not do the long road to Second City main stage. He was in an Improv Olympic team, and Del Close directed a show and said, "I want to bring this kid on." And he did not do the ETC theater. He did not work his way up. He jumped right into the main stage show.
I think that young people would greatly benefit from Second City training, in the sense that it provides you with the skills of being agile. It provides you with the ability to do what people call future thinking, because you're not working from a script. You know, you are making your script in real time, and you are evolving that script with the next day, the next evening performance, the performance after that. Nothing is static, and nothing is static in the world. I would say to sort of future generations, like, there's such powerful lessons to be learned in this art form, and it continues to evolve, and it is because it's so rooted in things that we understand from the past, but it's always looking forward. It's always about what's next, who's next, what else can we do. So it's kind of the best of both worlds.
What is the greatest lesson Second City taught you?
Well, I think I discovered a new version of the old rule. There's an old rule in improvisation called play to your intelligence, which is have your characters be as smart as you are. And a lot of times in comedy, dumb characters are funny. So if you're trying to be funny, you want to play somebody who's a little dim. And that seems to go against that rule of play to your intelligence. But I think the real rule is play to your dignity, which is to say, even if your character is dumb, blinkered, dim, they believe in and express and pursue their own dignity. They never compromise their belief in themselves, even though they're clueless in some ways, maybe.
Here's the greatest lesson, and this is just right now today, which is I'm an idiot and it's okay. And what I mean by that is, you know, It is true of every human being that we want to do well. We want people to think well of us. We want to be smart. We want to be successful. All those things. And we do get it wrong most of the time. Everyone does. It is a complete. If someone is sort of acting like they always get it right, please run away from them, because they're either a sociopath or a psychopath. We all have imposter syndrome. We all Google ourselves on occasion. We all have doubt. That's okay. And in fact, the quirky stuff, the mistakes, the misunderstandings, that's where all the comedy comes from. That is what ties us together as human beings. What connects us is just as much that we need each other, which we certainly do, but that we're all fallible. And in that, this idea at Second City that all of us are better than one of us is because of that. So if I'm improvising and I know your job is to save me and you know my job is to save you, we're gonna be just fine. Because that is the bottom layer. That is the fundamental understanding of anyone going on a stage. If you break that covenant, that's a problem. But when you don't, and the majority of the time you don't, that's magic. You know, it's crucial. So it's not just about creating really funny shows. It's not just about developing really funny people. It's about making better humans. And that is a thing. It took me a long while to learn that. That's certainly not the first part of my career. But it's definitely the second part of my career, and I think it's invaluable.
The Second City, the place where stars are born. You live, laugh, and learn. Why don't you give it a try? Thanks for watching.